What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Dylan Talks Tone. Today we're going to talk guitar setup, and this is going to be the first in a series of videos about biannual or annual, or however often you want to do it, guitar maintenance, and we're going to be specific to each general style of guitar. Before we get started, I want to thank my Patreon supporters and my YouTube members. You guys that have hit the little join button down there or gone to patreon.com/DylanTalksTone and joined. That's what really supports these channel videos where we have to buy tools and various things like that, or guitars, to do these kind of videos. So I appreciate you very much. That's what we use that for. Keeps that whole part of the channel going, and we appreciate you very, very much. There's a bunch of stuff going on over there. New product releases and early product releases and hanging out, and there's a chat over there that's going all the time that everybody's a part of, some live monthly hangouts, super fun stuff. So anyway, check it out. Today we're going to talk about Telecaster stuff because we're going to focus specifically on the American Vintage II Telecaster. The reason I picked this particular model is A, because I had one, and B, because this is a guitar that some folks have a little bit harder time setting up, or maybe you're a little afraid to set it up because there's some little things. There's the fact that they have the neck relief adjustment is on the heel side of the neck, which a lot of people don't like or are worried about, and so maybe they even avoid this guitar altogether. I'll show you why you don't have to worry about that. Also, we've also got 3-saddle bridge here that some folks have a hard time intonating, so we'll talk about that. We'll get into polishing our frets, we'll clean it up, we'll do whatever we need to do to get this guitar playing absolutely a-okay. This is not meant to be a brand new guitar or a new build setup sort of video. This series of videos is really for the rest of us who already own some guitars, or maybe you've just bought a guitar and it became wintertime, right? Like it's right now, it's February when we're making this video, and it's very, very dry. The humidity has fallen because of forced air heat. Guitars tend to move around a little bit when that happens. And so we've got this thing where all of our guitars might need a little adjustment in the wintertime, and then when we get back to the summertime, they may need a little adjustment again. That's what this is for. So we're gonna run through the setup, we're gonna run through that biannual maintenance, and we're gonna help you with this guitar, specifically today, the vintage style Telecaster, with its little idiosyncrasies. I wanna mention too, at DylanTalksTone.com, we have a bunch of Telecaster upgrades, right? So if you want to upgrade your pickups, your wiring, all that kind of stuff. And I made a kind of a big change actually to the website yesterday, where you can, when you buy a kit for a Telecaster, you can get the knobs and everything all soldered together and on the control plate, and you can order our flat 6 Tele pickups. And we made it to where you can actually upgrade the neck pickup to a humbucker. That works real well with that Tele bridge. We kind of narrowed it down to those ones, as well as a P90 or our Enduro big single coil. So there's some drop down buttons and stuff that you can go, or drop down menus that you can go and choose those pickups if you have a guitar that's routed for multiple pickup combinations and you wanted to try something different. People have been asking me for that, and so we went ahead and put it on the website. All right, let's get this thing over the bench and get going on it. Okay, so on the bench we have the Telecaster. So the first thing I want to do is I want to check the neck relief on the guitar as it sits right now before we take the strings off. In the wintertime, this will move around on you some because the humidity will change, the neck will expand and contract, and so we'll want to check it. So what I typically do is, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You could do it with a capo, but what I just do is I fret the first fret and I fret the last fret where it meets the body right there, and then I go about halfway between and I just give it a little tap. And you could actually check this with a feeler gauge too if you want like 5/1000ths of an inch or etc. Now what if it's off? If you've got a huge gap here in the middle, like let's say you've got more than about 5/1000ths. I actually like mine to be flat. If you want this gap to be a little bit tighter, then what we're gonna do is we're gonna tighten the truss rod about 1/8 of a turn, and it's gonna bring the center of the truss rod up, and it will close that gap up. If we touch this and it's like all the way tight and it's like rattling, when we play the guitar, then we're gonna actually loosen the truss rod about 1/8 of a turn or so, and we are going to then drop the center of the neck, and then that will adjust it. So now that I've got that kind of idea in mind what that measurement is, then and you can use a feeler gauge to do this, 5/1000ths of an inch, maybe something like that. But I do this particular guitar, this Telecaster, a little bit differently. So first of all, let's get the strings off the guitar, and I'm going to show you why I do it a little bit differently and how you can end up with a good result. Now that the strings are off, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check for loose parts. If your tuners are loose, if you've got any, now these tuners don't have nuts on the top, but if the tuners were to have nuts on the top, I would make sure that those were all nice and tight. Make sure everything was tight while you had it off, because since we're doing this seasonal maintenance, we're just kind of checking everything. So that's nice and tight. We get this back on the bench, and we just make sure that we don't have any rattles. This will get worked on later, so I'm not super concerned about it, but I like to check rattles. All right, at this point, what I'm gonna do is I want to go ahead and polish the frets. I am using the Lizard Spit fret polishing kit. I'll leave a link to it in the description. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at Sweetwater. You can get it a bunch of places, but it's basically these little scour pads that have some rubbing compound in them, and they do a fantastic job of getting any tarnishing off of nickel frets especially. And it'll just smooth it up. It will make them feel slicker and faster. And you know, as your guitar sits over time, if you've not done this since last season, they might tarnish up a little bit. It doesn't take any material off, it just polishes them. This kit, you can buy the whole kit, it's like 15 bucks, but I just buy the little refill packs on Sweetwater for $5, and I just start polishing. So you can see that it'll take the tarnishing off because you get the black stuff on your little pad there. They give you 24 sets in here, but I find that on a guitar that's well maintained, that you don't end up really causing any problem just using one for multiple frets. These ones aren't so bad because this guitar is actually not that old, but sometimes you'll end up having a lot of buildup of tarnishing, and not corrosion, but tarnishing, because nickel tarnishes. Now that we've got this all done, of course the fretboard's all mucked up, so we're going to use some Lizard Spit fretboard oil, and we are going to give it a good cleaning. This stuff is the bomb. It is the best fretboard cleaning oil I have ever used. Now let's talk about fretboard cleaning oil, shall we? People talk about hydrating a fretboard and how dry a fretboard looks when they get it out of the box and it needs to be oiled because it's dry. Oil and water don't mix, right? And so as a result, we are not moisturizing the fretboard right now. We are cleaning it, see? And it gets our finger gunk off of there, and it gets, of course, the polishing residue from me polishing this just now. But it does not hydrate the fretboard. Oil does not hydrate. That is a common myth. And so humidity in your room is what controls the hydration of your fretboard, not how much oil you put on it. Oil is not hydration. I know a lot of people argue about that, and a lot of people don't think I'm right about that, but I mean, it's simple science, really. It's oil and water don't mix, so oil is not controlling the hydration. The humidity in your room does that. And the majority of the problems that people have with their instruments and setup wise and stuff they can't control and fret sprout and all that sort of stuff is really a matter of not keeping your room between 40 and 60% humidity. If it drops below about 40% humidity, then you start to see fret sprout and stuff. That's not a quality control thing. That's a guitar mistreatment thing. So you need to make sure that if fret sprout appears, that is not a guitar problem, but that's actually just raise the humidity in your home. All right. Okay. That fretboard looks amazing. So we've got that all clean. And so before we put strings on it, I want to show you what we're going to do with this whole neck relief situation. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the pick guard. Okay, so if you were to need to adjust the neck relief on this guitar, there's a couple of things you could do. You could either use a right angle screwdriver, which actually works really awesome. I'll leave a link to one in the description. I'm actually not going to need to do anything to this guitar because it works pretty awesome. But here's my suggestion. So a lot of people don't like the idea of adjusting the neck relief on a guitar with the adjustment on this end of the neck because they think they have to chase it around a bunch, take it apart a bunch of times, and etc. In reality, you don't. Here's what I would do. As long as you're using relatively close to standard tunings and you're using relatively close to standard string weights, 9s, 10s, 11s, then what I would personally do is I would take a straight edge and I would put it on the neck with no strings on it. And I would set it completely flat, okay? So with no strings on it, set it completely flat. And the way you would do that then is you would just take and loosen. You don't even need to take the neck off. You just loosen the bolts on the back until you can just lift this up just a little bit and get your screwdriver in there if you don't have a 90-degree one. And you would do the same thing we talked about earlier. If you put a straight edge on here and there's a gap in the middle, then you tighten it and that brings the middle up. If it's backbowed this way, you would loosen it and that brings the middle down. Either way, use your straight edge. You could just use a cheap yardstick to get this really, 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 really close. A metal one, not a wooden one. And get this as flat as possible across the top of the frets, okay? Because then what will happen is when you set the guitar back up and you put the tension on there from the strings, it will give you just a little bit of neck relief, which is what we had here before we checked it. So mine hadn't actually moved very much, so I'm not gonna take it all apart and do it for nothing. But that's what I would do. Put an aluminum ruler across the top, or you can have a straight edge gauge. I'll leave a link to a couple of options in the description that are cheap that you can have around for all of your guitars. But on this guitar specifically, or any guitar with the heel adjust truss rod, set it totally flat. Then, once you put the strings on, it'll basically be in the right place. Now, I'm gonna leave the pick guard off of this guitar, and then we're going to go ahead and put strings on it and set the guitar up before we put the pick guard back on, because I wanna be able to hear when I test for pickup height later, and on these vintage style Tele stuff, there's no screw holes, so we got to leave the pick guard off. So let me go ahead and get strings back on this thing. String Joy 10 to 46, of course, link in the description. Okay, before we get on the actual setup of the guitar, one of the things I want to cover is if we have any fret sprout. If you've kept your guitar in 40 to 60% humidity like we talked about, you should be okay, but sometimes you're not. And sometimes you have to fix some stuff. So if you just run your finger down the side of the fretboard and you find one that's a little sharp, right? Then what I do is I take this StewMac file. Now you can get a cheap file from Harbor Freight and you can do the same thing. But if you look at the grits of these two files, you'll see that the one from Harbor Freight is way, way, way higher grit than the one that is from StewMac. And also the edge of the one from Harbor Freight has grinding material on it. The one from StewMac is rounded with no working edge, and that is the edge that you want to put down to the fretboard so that you don't mar or damage or accidentally file your fretboard. So you can modify one of these from StewMac to do it, but the grits aren't usually fine enough, and you end up with not a very smooth product in the end. Now, I want to show you something. We're not pressing, okay? Literally, we're not pressing. We're just taking the weight of the file in our hand. We're not pressing down. But if we've got a sharp fret end, then what we're going to do is we're going to take it in one motion like this, and we're just going to round over like that. Then we're going to take it on the other side, and we're just going to round over like that. And then we're going to take the flat side of the file and we're going to feel, without going into the finish, the edge, and that's it. You can do too much. Again, that's why this file from StewMac is so nice. I'll leave a link to it in the description. It's pretty reasonable. I think they're like 15 bucks or something, and it'll last you for the lifetime. You know, these are lifetime warranty things. So if you just got a couple of small sharp frets, you just go and roll over the top, and check the end. And that is it. Don't overdo this. Otherwise what will happen is you'll shorten up the top of the fret, or you will cause more edges than what you started with. So just be real ginger with it and go with find a nice fret that feels nice on a different guitar, you know, that's cut similarly, and come back and try it on this guitar. So that one needs a little, you know, and just keep it real. So the motion is not a lot of pressure, just the weight of the file in your hand. And as you go, roll over the top, just on the corner though. Don't come way back here, and don't come so far forward that you're cutting into the finish on the side of your neck. Typically you don't need to do all of them. Usually there's just one or two bad ones. But sometimes, depending on the conditions and depending on the guitar and the quality of the guitar, cheaper guitars, you're going to have to do this a bunch. You know, you're going to have to do it once. This is something that you shouldn't do every year. You should just do one time, and then it should be good as long as you keep the humidity in your room at the right level. All right, let's get on to set up the guitar. So we've got the strings on the guitar. We've got it tuned to pitch, and what I do is I fret the first fret, and I take my fingers like this, and I put one underneath the string and one beside the string, and I push like this, and I stretch the string. We did a bunch of tests with this and a video about it. The string actually does stretch. Make sure that you fret the first fret, because if you do that, you don't want to chip out your nut. You don't want to have the side of the nut pop off. That would be a bad deal. Now that we've got the thing back to tension, I'm going to do the same thing again, and I'm just going to double check. Yeah, see, now that I'm under tension, I just have barely a little bit of tiny bit of gap underneath that center of that string between the first fret and the last fret where it's attached to the body. I like mine to be almost completely flat. Depending on your style of music, you might want 5/1000ths, you might want 10/1000ths. 10/1000ths is kind of a lot. But I really like it to just be completely flat, and then once the pressure comes back on. See, and here's the thing, as a result of this, we don't need to take it back off and do it again, put it back on, try it again. That's a pain. Set it flat, the tension of the strings will get you basically where you want with no issues. Now on general maintenance on a guitar, typically you don't need, you know, or biannual maintenance, you don't typically need to do much nut adjustment. But sometimes you do. So you take your feeler gauges, and I like to go for about 20/1000ths usually, depending on the spec of your guitar, and just stick it underneath there and make sure that your nut height has not fallen over time, that you've not worn out your nut. That is one way to do it. The other way to do it is to fret the third fret and just make sure that you've got a little bit of air underneath there. Okay? Now we're not talking about setting up a new nut. We're not talking about grinding it down to right height. What we're doing here is maintenance, just making sure that we've not worn down our nut over the last 6 months or so of playing. This doesn't really happen that often for most of us who have multiple guitars. Yep, everything is cool. Now, the fancy way to do it, so what I did there is just fret the third fret and just make sure I got some light underneath there, and make sure that the light underneath there is pretty equal all the way across. That's kind of an eyeball thing, and it's a little kind of, I don't want to say half-ass way to do it, but that is just, if you look, you can just see it. You can see the gap underneath there, that it's about right. You can also measure that with a feeler gauge and just make sure that they're equal all the way across. The way I like to do it is use, again, this StewMac thing. You put this on the fret, first fret. And we've got a bunch of videos about this, that's why I'm not jumping into a bunch of stuff. Yeah, and we go across and we check all this stuff. Again, this is not setting up a new guitar from scratch, so we're not super concerned about this. What we're really concerned about on our biannual maintenance is just to make sure that that nut gap between the first, when we fret it on the 3rd fret, that it's relatively the same. And then you're going along and you know you bend your G string a lot and you're like, oh no, it's touching, and the rest of the strings are fine. Then we need to start worrying about maybe getting a new nut. But again, if you're a recreational player and you've got a few guitars, these will last years and years and years, and you don't necessarily need to worry about this unless you have really inexpensive guitars with really cheap plastic nuts. Then you might have to worry about it a little bit more. But most well-made guitars in the 21st century, you're gonna get years and years out of a nut, and this isn't gonna be too big of a problem. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna check is our string height at our 12th fret. And typically we use one of these straight rulers, right? And you pick your spec that you want to use for your particular guitar. Depends what it is, you know, if it's 5/64, 4/64. You can Google these specs for, you know, a Telecaster, for example, or over time, if you like your particular setup on your guitar, you can just duplicate it. But I like to go about 60 thousandths, and so I don't use that. I use this. Again, it works awesome. StuMac says don't use it like this, and there's a bunch of people in the comments that are going to tell you I'm using it wrong, but I don't care. I get consistent results with it. Alright, and to tell you the truth, the action on my lower strings is pretty high. I like to go for about 60 thousandths, and these are a bit all over the friggin' place. So what we're gonna do is we're going to reset this to 0, check it, and that's at 86. Make sure it's in the right spot. Ooh, that's really high. So we'll lower that down, reset it again. All right. A couple tricks here. As you're doing this with a regular straight ruler or with one of these fancy things, on a 3-saddle bridge, when you lower one, the other one lowers down just a little bit. So, you know, because it's just a single angle. So if you lower this one, then if you lower this one, then this one will come down just a touch. So you kind of have to work them a little bit together. So now we need to play with intonation, which on one of these guitars, a lot of people are really scared about, but I'm going to show you how easy it is. So let me get this guitar tuned back to pitch. Okay, it sounds out of tune because it's not intonated properly, but what I want to do before we set the intonation is just make sure that it feels right. Make sure that all your string heights where you reset everything is good. Because you don't want to mess with any of this after you've checked your intonation and set it properly. Intonation needs to be, besides pickup adjustment, the very last thing. Now use a good tuner for this and get this exactly exact as you possibly can. See, when the little wheel stops moving, we are on tune. Okay, when we intonate a guitar, we are going to do a couple of things. We're going to fret the 12th fret, okay? And basically, well, let's just do it. I'm gonna call that good. since let's check the B string. So when you're doing a 3 saddle bridge, you want to check the B and the E together. You want to check the G and the D together, and you want to check the E and the A together because they're going to interact with one another. See how the the B is going very sharp, okay? So if the tuner goes this way, then the saddle needs to go this way on a right-handed guitar. So let's go ahead and tighten that up about that much and retune. See, now the E is going to go a little flat. I'm going to call that good. Ooh, the G's way flat. And so is the D, or sharp, I mean. See how they're both going this way? So then let's move the saddle that way. Sometimes with a 3 saddle guitar, you got to split the difference a little bit. But oh, we like that. How about that? All right, well, I guess now it's time to go adjust pickup heights. For that, we need to plug it in and actually have fun. Okay, so the way I adjust pickups, now this could be done many different ways, but the way I adjust pickups is I just fret the last fret and I just make sure that the neck pickup has enough clearance between the string and the pickup so it doesn't hit. And so also so that it does not, when you play it, that it doesn't hit, that you've got maybe, I don't know, a couple of millimeters between there, or a millimeter or two. Then what ends up happening when you let go of the string, if you've done all of your other calculations correctly, you'll end up with about, 2 American dimes and a nickel, 150 thousandths of an inch, 3 millimeters, something in that area, depending on where you are in the world. And then you get a nice balanced neck pickup sound. So now what I do then is I just balance the bridge pickup between that one and the neck pickup to get it how I want it to sound. So I'm going to raise it up just a hair. Not a lot, just a little bit. And then your middle position is going to sound. Now here's the thing. This part of the thing is kind of all personal taste. If you're a person who doesn't use their neck pickup very much, or if you don't have a very good neck pickup, sometimes it can get a little woofy and low end heavy and kind of muffly sounding. You can lower it to get rid of some of that and kind of, it makes it a little weaker, but it also makes it a little high, more high end. You lose a little bit of power, but you lose that kind of woofy bottom end if you can adjust that out a little. Now this guitar sounds great, plays great, got new strings, got the frets polished up, got the fretboard properly lubricated, not hydrated, but cleaned. And I'll go ahead and just pop the pick guard back on here and we'll be good to go for another 6 months, or, you know, until springtime comes and the humidity raises again and we got to do this again. But usually, once your guitar is set up really well one time, you'll find that you really only have to adjust it or play with it once or twice a year. A couple of cautions I would give you with this. If you've not touched your guitar, chances are, well, I'll tell you, the only thing that can move without you touching it is the neck relief. The guitar expands and contracts, obviously, like we talked about earlier. So if you get your guitar and you're like, oh, the intonation is off, oh, the setup is a little bit off, do not touch the bridge, do not touch anything else, because if you didn't touch it, those things didn't move by themselves. The only thing that moved by itself was the neck relief. So try that adjustment first, recheck everything, and you might be just totally fine because you're only compensating for a couple of thousandths of an inch. So we went through the whole process today, but sometimes an 1/8 of a turn or a 1/4 of a turn on the truss rod just fixes everything. Chances are you'll have to adjust your intonation a little bit, but sometimes if it's very predictable, you'll know a guitar after a couple of years that, oh, in the springtime I just got to give it a little tweak and this little adjustment, and you document that stuff and you'll know what you pay, you know, what to pay attention to over time, and it'll get easier and easier and easier, and you won't have to do all this stuff. A lot of these guitars that I have, I don't touch everything. I just do the couple little tweaks that I need to do. Trick is though, on a guitar setup, you want to be very intentional about the order that you do things. So your neck relief, check your nut height, then check your string height, then check your intonation, then adjust your pickups. In that order, and you'll be good every time. We're going to do some more of these. Let me know what you want to see your biannual maintenance program on next. A Strat, a Les Paul, something with a floating tremolo. Let me know in the comments and we will try to do it. I don't have a Floyd guitar right now, so that's kind of off, but we've got a Les Paul, we've got something with a floating trem up there, we've got a Silver Sky, we've got a Strat, we've got a bunch of different stuff like that, so, or acoustic guitars too. Let me know about that as well. If you want to see any of those biannual maintenance programs, let me know what to do next. I'm going to do them all, but tell me in the comments what you would like to do next. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you in the next video.